Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if it's your first time. Please have a delve if it is your first time. I'd love to get to know you and please comment. But this is a video that ticks several boxes. This is a book review of a book that's essential reading, I think. So this is something I've just read. It's completely blown me away. I read it for a project about banned books. So the project is called the 24BB, 24 banned books, 24 books to read in 2024 that are banned or challenged. Started by MJ from Reading This Life. I don't think I'm going to get to 24, but I've said before that what I'm going to do, I'm going to read 24 and talk about them on the channel. And I'm sure I'll probably continue to do so because so many important and classic and acclaimed books are banned or challenged around the world, especially in the States. Because of that, I'm sure it's going to come up a lot. But I am very proactively looking at this now and picking books for this project. And I've just read an absolute phenomenal book that I want to talk about. I feel like I'm not going to be able to talk about everything in this video because it's so nuanced, it's so layered, there's so much to it, and there's so much you can talk about. But what I'd like to do is try to avoid spoilers if I can, because I'd thoroughly recommend that you read this. So it's better if you know less about the plot. So there's one major plot point that I'm not going to tell you. And I'm going to try and say something about Kevin without spoiling one of the really big things it does, which is a fantastic thing that the book does, very clever, that enhances the characterization of Kevin. I'll get there in a minute, but if you've read the book, you'll probably know what I'm alluding to. But I'm not going to spoil some aspects of it, but I'm going to give you the plot and some kind of general thoughts about why this book is so powerful. So I'm talking about Kindred by Octavia Butler. So Octavia Butler now has a fantastic reputation as being a significant writer on political fiction, but also science fiction. And she does cover the race issue a lot. And this is the second book I've read by her. So I read Parable of the Sower, and I've read this. They're actually, I think they're quite different books. I think they're written quite differently. It's a different reading experience. So I will talk about that for a moment as well. But Parable of the Sower is an incredible book, but it's just a very different experience reading it. But they both tackle the racial divide, racial inequality, the political history of the racial divide in America. This directly deals with it within the context of the slave trade, and Parable of the Sower is more of a dystopian allegory, which covers that kind of thing. It covers poverty and all sorts of. It covers class, lots of things. I mean, this covers lots of things besides race. To be fair, there's interesting exploration in here about sexual relationships, about power, about the role of the female in history, but it is heavily about race because the central plot throws the main character Dana into the past, and she's basically put into a slave situation. You know, she's literally has to live like that. So I'll get there in a second, but I just want to say that I'm a huge fan of time travel. Two of the significant videos on my channel are about time travel. I'm going to do more time travel videos next year, and I am really, it's one of my favorite things in fiction. But what's interesting about this particular book, as far as time travel goes, is the mechanics of time travel are not explored at all. It's more like a fantasy approach to time travel rather than science fiction approach. There's no time machine. It just happens. So Dana, the main character in this book, is thrown back to the early 1800s. The book was written in 1979, and the present day in the book is 1976. And Dana starts off the book with her husband Kevin, just sort of happily in the house. There's a little incident in the house, and then suddenly she's thrown back into the 1800s, and she's a black woman. Kevin, her husband, is white. She's thrown back to the past. She immediately, as she goes into the past, she realizes where she is, and she notices that her boy's in trouble. She basically saves him from drowning, and he's a white boy called Rufus. And through the early part of the book, you quickly learn that she keeps getting pulled back to Rufus at this time, slightly different times, because it kind of moves forward in time slowly. And each time she gets pulled back into the past, she's pulled back for longer. Okay, so it's not too much of a spoiler to say that she ends up staying for longer. And what happens is each time she becomes more aware and more directly involved in life as a slave, being part of the setup on this plantation from the Whalen family, which Rufus belongs to. So Rufus is the young son in the Whalen family who own the plantation. So that's where she keeps going when she goes back in time. And she keeps getting pulled back because she's genetically linked to Rufus. So that's the point of the context of why she keeps getting pulled back there. But then she keeps getting pulled back into her present day as well. And she figures out how that's happening, and she tries to manipulate it so it does happen. But there's a great bit in the middle which involves Kevin, which husband, which complicates that, and it's done so well. And on that note, there's a sense of threat and dread through the entire thing. It's a really tense book. You don't know what's going to happen. Every character is at risk in this, because even the white characters have got this intense relationship with the people around them. There are a couple of characters that are very powerful characters that clearly have got, they're less vulnerable, but there's a really intense feeling through the entire book that everybody has got issues. But clearly the main point of the book, the extremely harrowing thing about the book, the really painful thing to read sometimes, is the conditions that they were living under during the slave trade on the plantations as slaves. And it's explored quite directly, quite brutally sometimes. Some of the scenes are really difficult to read. So if you're someone, if you feel like you'd find that really hard, then it's worth me saying that it might be a tough book for you to read. In reference to Parable of the Sower, I don't think it's as bleak as Parables of the Sower, but I think that's partly because the characterization and the characters themselves are clearer here, and because this book is character driven, I think it makes it less bleak in a way. But it is really tough to read. It's very strong. It's very powerful. That first scene where she saves Rufus is followed really quickly. It's followed by another scene almost immediately where she sees a really horrible, horrific whipping, which is obviously really common in those times. And that's that fear of being whipped and beaten is obviously a major part of this domination that white slave owners on the plantation were using to get them to work, and for that power relationship, that fear of what would happen if they didn't behave correctly was palpable, and is it's on every page. There's threat and dread on every single page. It's really, really powerful. So this threat that you see on the page is also mixed in with this developing relationship. So the plot is really tied to the fact that there's this genetic link between Dana. Yeah, yeah, the plot is really based around the fact that there's a genetic link with Dana, with Rufus, the person that she keeps getting pulled back to, who's white, but there's a genetic link with Alice as well, who's another character in the book, and that developing relationship as she comes back into the past between her and those two people is kind of the plot, because she starts worrying about whether or not she's seeing an appearance from an historical character from her past that she knows should exist, and that's part of what's going on. But also, every time she gets pulled back, she gets thrown into a situation with one of the family, or just trying to kind of deal with surviving in the household. So she has a developing relationship with Rufus that's really, really the central part of the book. But also Alice, as I say, who's related and has a very different journey through the book. And Rufus's father, Tom Whalen, is a horrible character and a really strong archetype of that plantation owner. And Margaret, his wife, is also really horrible and treats Dana with absolute scorn. And it's interesting because a lot of the scorn from Margaret is because she distrusts the fact that Dana speaks quite well and also dresses quite well, and doesn't and thinks it doesn't quite compute, doesn't make sense that someone black in those early 1800s would speak like that. And it just, she doesn't like the fact she's more educated, she can read, and it's a threat to the household and to the system, and to their kind of values, if you like. So Margaret Whalen kind of reinforces those values of the slave trade in her attitude to Dana, which is done brilliantly, and she's a horrible character. But none of these characters are cartoonish or pantomime characters. These are very really fleshed out, strong characters, and that's one of the strengths of the book. That the entire book is run through the characters, and you've got another character called Sarah who works in the kitchen, and she's sort of like a kind of a matriarch kind of character, who's had to deal with a lot of loss in her life on the plantation, and a lot of changes that have been quite horrible. And her relationship with Dana is really interesting as well. It's so nuanced. There's so many layers to this book, and it's really interesting that this book has been banned and challenged in prisons across America. Lots of prisons, lots of state prisons, federal prisons have banned this because it explores racial inequality and explores the racial divide and racism in America, and Black history. And I think that is absolutely crazy. It's a brilliantly written book. It's really powerful. It's really thought-provoking. It's important to educate yourself about Black history. I mean, there's a debate going on in some parts of America about whether that kind of cultural studies thing should be taught in schools, which I just think should not be a debate. It's insane. And it's something that we all learn about in our schools in the UK. There's always a module or whatever you'd call it in usually year 7 or year 8 in schools on slavery and the slave trade. It's essential because it's such a significant wrong. It's such a significant crime in our history, in Western history, and the fact that it's something that some parts of America are trying to say is the wrong thing to educate people on is just absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, and because it's a work of fiction, Octavia Butler can explore this through the characters. And one of the things that's also interesting about the book is through these regular visits back in time, Dana starts to kind of assimilate herself to the to the times. And she says, sometimes she says she can understand why sometimes, because of the pain and the reprisals, the beatings, the overall sense of dread, and the idea of kind of like looking down and just getting on with it, she can understand why some people just didn't um, rebel and just got on with it, and just felt like, you know, they were kind of beaten down to do that, and they were assimilated. And you know, that's such an interesting thing to put in there after all you know, ultimately this is an absolute attack on this system that was there for so long, but it's also kind of saying that the conditions were so bad that you can understand how, or at least Dana was saying that she can understand why there was such a range of different reactions to it, and it wasn't just about fighting back. And I think that is really, really interesting. So I couldn't recommend this enough. This is one of the most important books I've read, and I do think the actual style of writing is different to Parable of the Sower as well. Parable of the Sower is quite densely written, so it's almost poetic in how it's written, I think, and it's a harder read from that perspective. This is a much easier read. I'd say you should read this one first, I think, but the power of the contents of the book is just as significant, as just as hard hitting, but it is a different way of writing. So I don't know if anyone's watching this that read both things, don't know if you can relate to that, but I think it's quite different. But yeah, an absolutely amazing book. This should not be banned, and the whole discussion of racial inequality should not be banned. The whole idea of looking at Black history and whatever developments we feel like we've done, and whether or not we should be, you know, we should be discussing whether or not we can do more. You know, one of the interesting things that came out of the Black Lives Matter marches was when the march stopped, and then you're at the Guildhall, and then you've got people on a mic talking about their own experiences, their childhood, and what it was like to grow up with their experiences in racism, and how they were spat on in playgrounds, and all that kind of stuff. All those kind of things are important discussions that, you know, I really wanted, you know, I wanted the people that were very cynical about those demonstrations to actually be there to hear those speeches when people talked about their own experience, because that was the whole point. That's why it's important. That's why it's important to understand that racism still exists, and we have to keep fighting against it. And obviously, this is systematic racism. This is when it's totally normalized, and you've got these people going through these horrific conditions, and there's a whole fear running through the whole book of being sold, and some of the minor characters, but still have a major impact. These minor characters that get sold at moments in the book that are shocking and really heartbreaking, you know, that affect the other characters. Yeah, this is real history being explored in this story, and this has repercussions for present day. You know, we haven't fixed this. You know, we may have moved forward, and there's no doubt we moved forward, but we haven't done enough, and we have to keep talking about this issue. We have to keep being open about the fact that there are still there is still this racial divide, and if you kind of, you know, stick your head in the sand and say, no, that's not really about that anymore, then that you're not helping the future at all. You're going backwards. So and you know, and there, it's weirdly, there is, to me it's kind of common sense, but there are still people who insist that somehow talking about it perpetuates it, which is just lunacy. So this is important to read. It's important to be put in schools. It's important to be put in libraries. I don't really understand why it's not put in prisons, but if someone can explain that, that'd be great. But this is part of that band project because I wanted to include this. I think I knew it was, well, what I knew about it, I had a very strong feeling it would be a significant book, and it it would totally won me over very quickly, and I found it really gripping to read as well. So not only is it really important, but actually I couldn't put it down as well. I read it very quickly, and I was pulled in. I wanted to keep picking it up. I thought it was so beautifully written, and I cared so much about all of the characters, including, as I said, those minor characters. It was heartbreaking what some of the things happened to those characters, and some of it was really difficult to read. Yeah, just, it's utterly gripping, but it is brutal and horrible sometimes. So yeah, it's just a phenomenal book. Kindred, Octavia Butler. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, everybody.
Picture of what it's like to be